World War II, The Cannibal of the Alps. Based on true World War II accounts, where war, isolation, and hunger gave birth to something unspeakable. My grandfather never talked much about the war. When I was a kid, he'd sit in his old armchair by the window, staring at the mountains outside like he was still up there, lost somewhere in the snow. But one winter night, when the wind howled against the windows and the lights flickered, he told me a story. He said it was the only one he could never forget. He made me promise not to repeat it until after he was gone. He called it the Lost Battalion of the Alps. In the winter of 1943, my grandfather, Private Thomas Harland, 19 years old and too young to understand what war really meant, was sent with a small British infantry unit to assist Swiss forces along the border. Switzerland was neutral, at least on paper. But neutrality didn't stop the Germans from pushing closer. England quietly sent a few platoons to reinforce small mountain villages that could serve as strategic entry points if the Nazis decided to invade. That's how my grandfather ended up in a place called Brunanwald, a nameless speck of a village buried between two peaks in the Swiss Alps. Fewer than 500 people lived there. Wooden houses leaned into the wind, snow crusted over their roofs, and the church bell tower stood like a frozen finger pointing into the gray sky. It was early December when they arrived. A storm had already begun to roll in, one that would become the worst winter Switzerland had seen in decades. Within days, the narrow roads were swallowed by snowdrifts. The telegraph lines went dead. They were completely cut off, no orders, no communication, no way home. The soldiers did what they were trained to do: fortify, patrol, and wait. The days were short, and sunlight touched the valley for only a few hours before the mountains cast it into shadow. By January, it felt like perpetual dusk. The villagers rarely spoke to the British troops. Most of them spoke a dialect of German that few of the men understood. They would nod politely in the streets, faces pale and tired, and retreat indoors as soon as night fell. Something about the place felt wrong. My grandfather said the air was too quiet, like the snow itself was listening. It started small. A farmer claimed that pieces of firewood were vanishing from his shed. Another said someone stole a tarp from his barn. A week later, people began to notice that valuable things were disappearing: a wedding ring, a silver cross, a ceremonial halberd that hung above the fireplace in the mayor's home. At first, everyone blamed the soldiers. Outsiders, after all, were easy targets for suspicion. But then came something no one could explain. A child went missing. His name was Oscar, 6 years old. He'd gone out to fetch water from the well and never returned. They searched for him for days, but the snow had buried everything. No footprints, no signs of struggle. Just emptiness. The villagers whispered that a wolf might have taken him. The soldiers laughed it off, but that laughter didn't last long. Because a week later, another child disappeared. Then another. By the end of the month, 5 children were gone. My grandfather said that by mid-February, fear had settled over Brunanwald like another layer of frost. No one went outside after dark. Windows were shuttered tight. The church bell no longer rang. The soldiers took turns patrolling the streets, rifles slung over their shoulders, boots crunching in the snow. It was on one of those patrols that a desperate villager stumbled toward them, shouting in broken English. "Where, you take them? The children?" The man's eyes were wild, frostbitten skin peeling at the edges. It took hours and a translator to calm him down, and even then, the meaning was clear: the villagers believed the British were behind the disappearances. The captain, a man named Frederick Mills, stern and calm under pressure, gathered his men in the church that night. He told them the locals were frightened, irrational, and that their duty was to maintain order until the blizzards cleared. But there was something else in his eyes, something uncertain. He ordered double patrols. Nobody was to leave the barracks alone. That same night, one of the soldiers didn't come back. Private Reginald Carter, 22, cheerful, always joking, the kind of man who could make you forget you were freezing and half-starved, vanished without a sound. They searched the village from end to end. Nothing. No tracks, no blood, no sign of struggle. Just the endless white. Days turned into weeks. The storm outside eased, but inside the men's minds, another storm brewed. Some whispered that Reginald had deserted. Others said he'd lost his mind and wandered into the blizzard. But when another child disappeared, the seventh, the soldiers stopped talking altogether. Something was hunting them. My grandfather said he would wake up in the barracks at night and hear things, soft footsteps outside, a dragging sound across the snow, like something heavy being pulled. One morning they found claw marks on the wooden door of the church. The villagers called it der Geist der Berge, the spirit of the mountain. They said the snow itself could come alive and take those who didn't belong. By March, only the youngest soldiers still believed the rumors were nonsense. The rest had seen too much. It was early spring when the snow began to thaw, turning the streets into slush. The roads were still impassable, but the air had changed, thinner, quieter, as if waiting. That night, my grandfather was on patrol with 3 others, Sergeant Collins, Private Harris, and Corporal Blake. It was past midnight when Harris froze mid-step. He pointed toward a nearby cottage. And there, through the dim yellow glow of a window, they saw a shadow standing outside, peering in. It was tall, hunched, its breath fogging the glass. "Hey!" Collins shouted, raising his rifle. The figure jerked around, and ran. The soldiers gave chase, boots pounding over melting snow, shouts echoing off the mountains. The figure moved fast, stumbling and limping but desperate. It darted between trees and across drifts until it reached the outskirts of the village, where a massive snowbank had formed. Then, to their horror, the figure jumped straight into the ground. At first, they thought it had vanished. But when they drew closer, they saw it had actually dropped into a hole, a kind of burrow carved into the snow itself. They surrounded the opening, rifles aimed. "Come out with your hands up," the sergeant yelled. No response. Then, gunfire. Bullets ripped from the darkness of the hole, striking the snow around them. The men dove for cover, returned fire blindly into the mouth of the tunnel. The sound of their rifles echoed through the valley until finally, silence. No movement. No sound. Collins ordered one man to check the hole. Harris volunteered. He drew his pistol, took a deep breath, and crawled in. Moments later, he stumbled back out, pale as chalk, shaking uncontrollably. "Jesus Christ," he whispered. "It's him. It's Reginald." My grandfather took a flashlight and leaned into the hole. The beam cut through the darkness, and what it revealed would haunt him for the rest of his life. Reginald lay against the far wall, a bullet hole through his chest, eyes still open and glassy. His uniform was filthy, torn, smeared with something darker than mud. But what froze my grandfather's blood wasn't Reginald. It was the others. The floor of the cave was lined with small bodies, the missing children. Some whole, others, not. Their faces were pale, half covered with snow, eyes frozen wide in terror. The air reeked of rot and smoke. Scattered around them were scraps of meat, bones stripped clean, and a blood-stained halberd, the ceremonial weapon stolen weeks before. Reginald had been living there. Eating them. Driven mad by the isolation, the endless winter, and the hunger that came with dwindling rations, he had turned on the only thing weaker than himself. He had broken into homes at night, taking children from their beds, using the axe to dismember them before the dawn. Then he would retreat to his burrow in the snow, where he cooked and devoured them by candlelight. When the snow finally melted and the roads reopened, the British command sent a rescue convoy to Brunenwald. They found 7 dead children and 1 dead soldier. The rest of the company, what remained of them, were silent. No one spoke of what had happened. Officially, the report listed Reginald Carter as killed in action. The cause, exposure and psychosis resulting from prolonged isolation. But my grandfather said that wasn't the whole truth. He told me that after they buried the children and burned the cave shut, something strange happened. Every night, just before dawn, he would hear footsteps outside his window, crunching in the half-thawed snow. He would go to the door, open it, and find nothing but a trail of small footprints leading away into the trees. He said those prints never melted, no matter how warm it got. My grandfather passed away in 1996. At his funeral, among his medals and old photographs, I found a single faded picture, the men of his company standing in the snow outside a small Swiss church. I counted 10 faces. But according to the records, only 9 soldiers were ever assigned to Brunenwald. The 10th man in the photo, standing off to the side, half in shadow, looked exactly like Reginald Carter. And in the bottom corner of the photo, almost buried in the snow, were tiny footprints. War doesn't always kill you, my grandfather once said. Sometimes it just makes you into something else. And every winter, when the wind howls through the mountains, I can almost hear it, faint laughter carried on the cold, the sound of a soldier who never left the Alps.